Hello and welcome. This is Market View. It's 2 p.m. the 20th of January. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Lunglele Makakula. To watch us on our YouTube page, Eswatini TV. We are on DSTV as well, channel 286. Following the successful and passing into law of the Liquor License Act in 2023, the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Trade has, through a statement it released on Friday, notified the public of its decisive efforts to ensure that liquor businesses across the country operate in full compliance with the amended legislation. The statement was released by the Minister Mangoba Khumalo. It further says that this measure is being implemented only to protect consumers. Could the recent crackdown by the ministry on liquor businesses breaking the provisions of the legislation affect your business? Stay tuned for an interview where business journalist Nelsiwe Ndlangamandla sits down with the chairperson of the Liquor Licensing Board, Mdeni Vilagati, to find out all there is to know about how liquor businesses can operate within the confines of law. And in our news today, the head of the data center at the Science and Technology Park, Xolile Nxumalo, says the partnership between the Ministry of ICT and Google will be beneficial not only to public service, but it will also stimulate economic activity. And for our financials, our last segment, markets are optimistic as Trump returns to the White House. And SBI will join us later for this analysis. For now, let's take a look at our first story. In our leading story, the Real Science and Technology Park says the partnership between the Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology and Google will be beneficial not only to public service but even businesses. Head of the data center at the Science and Technology Park, Xolile Nxumalo, says this partnership will stimulate economic activity. The Minister of Information, Communication and Technology, Savannah Mazia, launched the partnership at the Eswatini Revenue Service headquarters this morning.
This marks the beginning of the partnership with Google. The partnership was initiated by the Minister of ICT. So the main aim was to enhance the provision of the services to the citizens, mainly the government services that are being provided by government. So this partnership is aimed as, looking at what we can, do together with Google in terms of bringing innovation and also enhancing the way we deliver the digital services to the citizens. So the introduction of the Government in Your Hand project by the Minister of ICT actually speaks to bringing these services to the tips of our fingers in terms of saying we want to see the services being brought to the people through the gadgets that we already possess, like we have our cell phones, we have our computers, we have our tablets. So whichever gadget you have, you can actually use to access the services that government provides for us. If we digitize the services that government provides, this actually also benefits the business because if we say all the services we can get them online and actually even go as far as paying for the service online, then it makes your life easy.
The business sector says the newly formed partnership between the Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology and Google will permeate to the private sector at some point and will help them leverage on the cutting-edge technology for improved business and trade opportunities. This was said by the Chief Executive Officer Inati Lamini shortly after the launch of the partnership.
The country is in partnership with Google. Only God knows what's going to happen next to transform, one, the competitive landscape of this country, because you know that what drives competition now, regionally and globally, is ICT. And to see a ministry being ahead of the curve in addressing issues of ICT, as a private sector, we say, well done, thank you. keep on moving forward. So we are here, all of us, as a private sector, to support this initiative. We have been on record for many years asking that we take this subject very, very seriously. And now a government ministry has decided to hear our cry and they're moving forward. So we want to partner with them to move forward. I know for a start they're looking at public services, that's good. But we think that will, it will permeate also across the private sector, such we find ourselves as a country being very, very competitive. So we are saying this is a good day in this country, and we celebrate this achievement. We approve of this partnership with Google, a universal company that drives ICT.
All right, and that's it for our business news. Thank you for staying with us. This is the first episode of Market View this week. After the break, Nelsiwe sits down with Mdeni Vilagati.
Be sure to catch Business Watch every Wednesday between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., where we feature the latest updates on business news, market trends, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders, as well as insights on emerging small and medium enterprises in the commercial sector. Business Watch, your business leader.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Are you a business in the liquor space and wondering if you're operating within the stipulations of the new Liquor Licensing Act, which came into effect on the 1st of November 2023? With a recent crackdown by the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Trade on liquor businesses breaking the provisions of the legislation affect your business? Well, stay tuned for this upcoming interview where business journalist Nelsiwe Nhlagamandla sits down with the chairperson of the Liquor Licensing Board, Mdeni Vilagati, to find out all there is to know about how liquor businesses can operate within the confines of law.
Chairperson, thank you for joining us on the show. Some businesses in the liquor space face the harsh reality of being closed if they continue not to follow the regulations. Can you briefly tell us what are some of the challenges that were faced by these businesses that face closure?
I take it you are referring to the business at Eswatini. Well, in relation to that business, there have been several violations of the Act and the regulations which regulate the sale of liquor in the kingdom. These violations include not observing operating hours. Secondly, the patrons of the business being a hindrance to other members of the public by, for instance, parking their cars at the entrance of the university at night after hours, and as a result preventing vehicle access to the university and noise generally. Mm-hmm. And fourthly, there have been convictions by the licensee or the manager on the premises has been convicted of offences in the liquor legislation. So what has happened is that due to the complaints we've received about that business, the licensee decided not to apply for a renewal of its license.
What happens, Chairperson, before a business is liable for closure?
If the licensee has been convicted at least 3 times for liquor-related offences in a calendar year, that business is liable for closure. That's one. Another basis on which the board may revoke a license is where there have been complaints from the residents. Residents who reside within a radius of 1 kilometer from the business premises. There must be at least 10. They write a letter to the board detailing the failure to comply with license provisions by the licensee. And also in that letter, the letter should state what it is that they're asking from the board. But before a board can take the drastic step of revoking a license, the licensee must be given a hearing. So the board must be satisfied that the complaints reflected in the resident's letter have merit. So typically the complaints we have received in the past relate to operating hours and noise.
Kule ndzaba yasekwaluseni nje, Chairperson, I hear you speaking about issues of parking. Are there any zoning or location restrictions that are considered before a business is granted a license?
Okay, thank you for that question. Under the old legislation, there was no provision for the board to consider things like that. Right? But under the new legislation, one of the requirements for the grant of a license is that it must be at a designated business area. So you can't just have your license anywhere. And yet under the old legislation, it wasn't stipulated. So if you are in town or within an area under a municipality, the business premises must be zoned for the purpose of it must be zoned for that purpose. So it must comply with town planning, with a town planning scheme. So if your business premises don't comply with the applicable town planning scheme, you will not be granted a license. Now, to answer your question, under the old legislation, there was an old legislation in 1964 legislation, it was not a requirement. But the current legislation that we're using, the 2023 Act, it is a requirement.
You mentioned, Chairperson, that for a business to be considered for closure, there has to be, amongst other things, a complaint from 10 people in the community. What if the 10 people from the community are organized by my competition? If I'm operating a business and my competition feels like I'm taking his or her customers, then they organize these 10 people. What steps do you follow before you can close a business?
The letter of complaint by residents is just one of many ways. One of many ways in which we may consider the revocation of a license. We don't act solely on the report, on the complaint by residents. We convene a hearing to test the authenticity of the complaint. So before we reach a conclusion that the complaint has merit, we must be satisfied that what is complained of is true. So we convene a hearing where people take an oath and they're questioned by us to test the veracity of what they say. But the complaint by residents is just one of several processes available in the Act for a complaint to reach us. The complaint by the residents may be made at any time, the 10 residents at any time. Another way in which a complaint may be lodged is to object to the renewal of a license. That's done at year end when the board is considering renewals. Right? There you don't need 10 residents. It could be anyone. It could be a competitor. It could be a member of the public. They file an objection to say, we object to the renewal of this. It could be the local authority. It could be the traditional authorities in that area. We say we object to the renewal of this license because of A, B, C, D, and E. Even there, we don't act on the objection. We have to convene a hearing to test its veracity. Number 3, a member of the public at any time, may complain to a member of the board about a business. A member of the board or the entire board needs to take appropriate action. And what typically we do in a situation like that is that we launch our own investigation.
Businesses in the liquor space have also complained that there is unfair competition, especially from canteens, as they are now selling to the public. And there is also the issue of wholesalers who are now selling to individuals. Have you heard or have you dealt with such cases? And if so, how?
At the end of year statutory hearings, the licensees did not communicate to us the complaint about unfair trading from canteens. But I take it's a genuine complaint. Statutorily, in terms of the regulations, a canteen is only licensed to sell to members of that service and ex-members. So people are currently serving in that organization and former employees. So a canteen is not supposed to be selling to me and you. The complaints from our licensees is that illegal traders are purchasing from wholesalers in bulk. That's the complaint we had. It may well be that there are complaints about wholesalers selling to members of the public for personal consumption. We haven't had that complaint, but the complaint that was addressed, that was communicated to us, was that wholesalers are selling to illegal traders. So in response, the wholesalers have said to us, no, the licensees give their licenses to the unlawful traders. So the unlawful trader comes to us with a license, right? They purchase with using the license of a licensed trader. So we haven't interrogated that.
Are businesses that are operating near schools going to be closed, Chairperson, especially those that were granted licenses a long time ago?
Those businesses can only have their licenses suspended or revoked if they trade in violation of the law. That's existing licenses. Now, with respect to new grants or people who want to open businesses, the 2023 legislation prohibits the grant of a license in close proximity to a school, to a hospital, to a clinic, places of worship, in close proximity to a highway or a freeway. That's the new legislation.
Unfortunately, Chairperson, we've run out of time, but I hope we will have you back on the program because there is a lot that businesses in this sector want to know, especially in relation to this new legislation.
All right, and that was the chairperson of the Liquor Licensing Board, Mdeni Vilakati, giving us an insight on unfair competition and why the ministry revokes liquor licenses from businesses. After the break, we connect with Senators Via for today's financial markets. Stay with us.
Be sure to catch Business Watch every Wednesday between 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., where we feature the latest updates on business news, market trends, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders, as well as insights on emerging small and medium enterprises in the commercial sector. Business Watch, your business leader.
Welcome back. You're still watching Market View. It's 21 minutes after 2. We now connect with Sanele Sbiya for today's financial markets. Mr. Sbiya, very good afternoon and welcome to Market View. Thank you for tuning in today. So let's start with markets in the U.S. It seems markets are optimistic there as Donald Trump returns today to the White House. What's happening?
Thank you, Lungelele, and good afternoon to the viewers. So what we're seeing, as you're rightly pointing it out, is the fact that, markets are a bit optimistic about the return of Trump into the White House. And we know that today we're going to see his inauguration back into the White House. That's just probably going to be in a few hours from now. So what we're seeing right now is, given the last few trading hours, and we've seen those very strong earnings coming in from the bankers, and what we're seeing is we've seen the Dow Jones edging up a bit. Same thing with the Nasdaq and the S&P 500. So what's actually happening right here is we are looking at stocks that are likely to benefit from a Trump presidency. That will include your Teslas and your Microsoft, within the tech stock, within the tech sector. So those ones are going to actually be doing well and expected to do well under a Trump presidency. So those ones are now actually pulling up the curve, giving us those gains, and we actually at all-time highs that we've not seen. So remember the most that we've seen out of the Dow Jones throughout the last year was actually around 42,000, but right now we are at that 43,000. The Nasdaq edging closer to 20,000, and the S&P 500 just trying to return to that 6,000 mark, which is so right around the elections. But also putting a damper on the markets, because ideally we're supposed to see numbers relatively high. We're supposed to see the S&P 500 within that 6,000 mark, the Nasdaq within that 20,000 mark. With the Dow Jones probably should be around 44,000. But what we're seeing right now is concerns around the interest rate. We know the Federal Reserve Bank is expected to table their interest rate decision on the 29th of January. But because Trump policies are likely to be inflationary, so we do expect the Feds to hold or just cut down a bit. So we've seen stocks that are going to actually benefit from a return to interest rate neutrality, taking a knock there. And then moving on into Europe. Again, what we're seeing there is a bit of optimism, and more especially if you look into the French markets, we're seeing them at around 7,220. That's the overall volumes there. So that's now somewhat a return to that 8,000 mark, which was the 6-month equilibrium in 2023 at those very early days. So we are hoping to see it staying at that level. And then also looking into Germany, you can see that there is the DAX again on that 20,000 mark, inching closer to that 21,000 mark. The S&P 500 again at an all-time high. Remember the most that we've seen the S&P 500, the FTSE 100 hitting last year was actually around 8,400, but right now we've hit that 8,500 mark. And it's purely because we are expecting Trump policies. So what markets are doing right now is taking their best bets while how much the extent of those tariffs will be. But another beautiful story that's buoying markets today, Lou, is what we've seen in China. China has actually hit that 5% growth mark, something which we were all a bit hesitant. We didn't see that happening, right? But when we looked at the numbers that just came out a few days ago, it showed that China did hit that 5% growth mark, and that somehow brings a sigh of relief into the markets in terms of a demand surge that we are likely to see. If China grows, we do expect consumption to grow, and we do expect to see the Chinese market buying a lot of commodities and then pushing demand up a bit. Moving into Asia, what we see that the Nikkei there is performing relatively well. And when we look into the Hang Seng, again, it's moving closer to that 20,000 mark. But if you recall, the Hang Seng was actually at 22 just immediately after the election, but it hasn't actually returned to pre-pandemic level. It hasn't returned to pre-COVID levels, which was the levels around 23,000. So bringing in that sigh of freshness into the markets is that 5% growth target within China. And we know that, the Bank of Japan has actually come out to say that they're going to increase interest rates. Remember, the Bank of Japan was on a negative interest rate territory for the past 10 to 15 years. It's only right last year when they started coming back to this positive interest rate territory. So, an increase in Japan is still a move towards interest rate neutrality. So in as much as they're increasing, but they're still below interest rate neutrality. So we do expect that to actually also breathe in a sigh of relief into the markets. Coming into Johannesburg, again, we are looking out at what is going to happen in terms of the policies, and we are now building up towards towards the very first State of the Nation address. We are building up towards the very first budget of this government of national unity. And that's where we're going to see what this government of national unity is going to do. So at this present moment, the markets are just looking strong and trading on this Trump euphoria right now. But we do expect that to dissipate over the next month when we bring attention back to domestic or regional happenings. That would be your the State of the Nation address and the budget. And also domestically, we are looking into the budget, and we're also looking into the speech from the throne in terms of what this current government is going to do. So that's what the Eswatini Stock Exchange is also reflecting. If you look into what is happening politically within the country, we do know that there is a bit of lack of cohesion that analysts look at and see within the government. So that's why we've seen last week the Eswatini Stock Exchange take a few knocks from that 490 mark, losing a few points to that 489 mark. And then in terms of our commodities, we are seeing oil being subdued purely because we've seen if the first few prisoners being released, the first few hostages being released from Gaza, and it's just being subdued back to that 80-28 mark. We do expect that if this ceasefire deal holds, we should see that price of Brent crude oil returning back to or returning to that 77, 78 type of region, which would symbolize what the economy is going to do. But then again, we do expect Trump policies to affect the price of oil. We do know Trump is a more of a drill, baby drill type of person. So what's that going to do is it's most likely going to push the price of oil further down if the US increases their output. And then in terms of gold, we're seeing gold holding steady at that 745 mark, purely because there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what Trump is going to do. So that's why gold remains high. And we do know we expect that uncertainty around the interest rates within the US. And then when we come now into the currencies, we can see that the Lilangeni has actually lost a bit of ground against all major currencies, but we're losing ground in a relatively strong region at that 1877 against the dollar and at 1937 against the euro, at 1833 against the Japanese yen. Again, all that is Trump euphoria playing in. And if you look at the 10-year bond yield in the US, it's actually at an all-time high because of this uncertainty that we are seeing in the markets. Thank you, Lou. That's where I remain for the day.
All right, thank you, Sanele, for today's analysis. And that was in-house economist Sanele Sibiya giving us his insight on today's financial markets. This marks the end of our program today. This was the first episode of Market View this week. If you've just tuned in or not, you can still watch this episode on our YouTube page, Eswatini TV. We'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day.